So, on the surface, I mean, somebody would look at this and go, well, this is, it's not, it's very, it looks very easy, but this is anything but. Talk about how much you put into this process and how long it took you to create each still, each graphic, and then move them around. I mean, this process had to be daunting.
It was also because I'm not an animator, so it was my first fully animated project, even though, as you had a chance to see, it's not really classic animation. And the reason why it's not classic animation is, again, because I'm not I'm not an animator, so I had to really create a style of my own. And I did do some attempts, but the good thing is that this project is truly a creature of the quarantine. So I had a lot of time in my hands, and I would say that from the moment I got the story and I started writing the script and drawing everything, because of course I had to draw everything entirely on my own, it took me almost 3 months to do the entire thing. And of course I wasn't doing anything else. So being in quarantine did actually help very much.
I'm curious, in terms of, you have 40 minutes of a material basically here, with everything that from start to finish. And I'm curious, was it that you came up with 40 minutes and we're kind of in this no man's land because it's not a short, it's not a feature. So what could it be possibly? And you broke it up into episodics at that point, or was this always a thought to be an episodic adventure?
Oh, no. It started as an episodic adventure because I adapted it from an existing 19th century short story. And the short story itself is set during a trial for witchcraft, which happens through different days. So while I was reading it, that screamed series to me. And I had never done a series before as a director. I've been working on series as an assistant director, even big series, but I had never done one on my own. And then at that point, the final result was almost 40 minutes. But that was okay with me because this story is all about anarchic outrageousness, so to speak. So that I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun that even the structure of the series sort of reflected that? And in fact, it does. Basically, every single episode has a different length. And especially the last one is 13 minutes long. So the anarchy can really be experienced all the way through, and it's deliberate.
What made you choose episode 4 for Slamdance, or did they choose that one?
They chose it, and I'm very, very happy about it.
Yeah.
Also because it's midway through the series, but I also think, and I'm getting this chance to to talk to the audience right now. Don't be scared, because it's true, it's midway through the series, because it's a total of 6 episodes and this is episode 4. But the good thing is that in a way it is detached from the main narration. And at the same time it sums up not all, but many of the main themes of the series, like bigotry, the use of religion as an instrument of power, the use and abuse of religion as an instrument of power, and secret desires and instinct. So yeah.
Classism too, a little bit of classism, a little bit of misogyny. There's a little bit of more misogyny toward the end of this series. But...
Oh yes, because tragically, and that is also something that happens in the original story. Tragically, it was a profoundly patriarchal society. People was treated abominably, especially if there were women and or children. Like in this case, the main plot line involves a 9-year-old little boy who is put on trial for witchcraft. So, which in and of itself sounds like a tragic thing, and it is. But the interesting thing is that the original story and then my series really is not tragic, because this little boy is something very different from what the Inquisitors were expecting and were used to.
Yeah.
He's something completely other on many levels.
Absolutely. Yeah. How much research did you go into? Were you a big fan of kind of like the Salem witch trials and kind of this dark arts kind of idea where people were kind of saying, things about magic that, obviously hold only self-truths, were you a big fan of that, or was that something that you had to research and kind of get into to create this?
No, I already knew a lot about it. What I didn't really know too much about was the Bamberg witch trials, which were trials that happened almost at the same time in Germany, which I think inspired the author of the short story, Ludwig Bechstein, because he wrote this collection of stories entitled in German Hexengeschichten, which in English translates to something like witch stories. And the interesting thing is that he got his inspiration from original actual witch trials that he had the chance to study and work on in local Bavarian libraries, but there's very little critical literature about this. Bechstein was very famous at the time among his contemporaries. He was contemporary of the Grimm brothers. And up to a point, his own collections of fairy tales became more famous than the Grimm brothers'. And in Germany, he's still quite well known, not so much in the rest of the world, unfortunately, because he was a very great collector of stories, folklore, name it. And yeah, there's very little critical literature about this collection. So I can only suppose that he based some of his stories, especially the Little Pitchfork Rider, which is the story I took inspiration for my series.
Right.
And I can only presume that he took inspiration from the Bamberg witch trials, which involved at some point a little boy of 10 who came from a very humble family of swineherds. And there's many elements, the age, the profession, or at least the occupation of the family, that make me think that this is not just a coincidence. The original story was actually horrid because the entire family was executed and the little boy was spared, at least during a first wave of witch trial insanity, but he was forced to watch his mother and his older brothers dying.
Yeah.
And actually, during the final tortures, the Inquisitors chopped off his mother's breasts, put them on spikes, and forced the other brothers to suck from them. I'm sorry to tell these terrible details, but all of these things actually happened, and sometimes we should be reminded what human nature is capable of. And they did all of this, forcing this little boy of 10 to watch it. Then eventually some monks managed to have him in their convent. They tried to convert him and they tried to save him that way. But the Inquisitors actually wanted him back. So the following year, they executed him as well when he was 11. It was terrible. It was.
Yeah, it's awful.
But this was just one of the many stories. Like in Salem, this thing quickly went out of hand, as any kind of witch trial, real or metaphorical, they always get out of people's hands. And so many people were eventually not just tried but executed. And also at the beginning, it was an instrument against the poor and the harmless, which is yet again another important theme of my story.
And the interesting thing I think about how you've presented your series is you've chosen to go a different tone with it. you have a more innocent, more you have a lot of funniness to there's a lot of humor injected into this. Was that on purpose because you didn't want it to be another one of those grim kind of tales and kind of, you know, but still you still give it that underlying tone?
Yeah.
So
No, I wanted that. Also, the vibe of the original short story that I adapted was exactly that thing. So basically, I took it and then made it my own because in some aspects I was very I was deliberately faithful to original literary sources, but
right.
at the same time, and in this case episode 4 speaks for itself, I really went my own way.
Yeah.
And so from the original story, I kept the original vibe, lots of the dialogues during the trial, but then I also sort of changed stuff. There's pretty much every episode, there's many inventions of mine that have nothing to do with the story. They're inspired by it, clearly, but they're not from the original story. And also the ending of the original story is definitely not mine. So in case you manage to get the Little Pitchfork Rider, and good luck, because I found out as I was working on it that it's a very obscure story from a very obscure collection. So good luck with that. But besides it, even if you read it, then that wouldn't spoil your experience of my series, because my ending is very different.
Right.
I thought the original ending was lovely, but a bit too cute. And let's say let's say it's very different.
Yeah, let's leave it there.
Yeah.
You know, I see a lot of your cinematic experience in this production, the shadows, the movements, the framing. How much of your narrative experience lent itself to the animation process? And how much of that were you surprised was able to lend itself to the animation process? Were you surprised that you, because of your experiences before with narrative and everything like that, that you were able to use a lot of that?
Oh yeah, undoubtedly. And even though I've been dealing mostly with live action, my original and primary sources of inspiration whenever I work on a new project are paintings, photographs, and illustrations, and then music. So I do rely on films as well, but not as much as on these other things. So I would say that the images are very helpful for me in order to find new ideas, and then the music really helps me shaping such ideas, which is what eventually I did with this series. Although in this specific case, music came almost as at the same time as I was doing animation. I had a very clear idea about what I wanted.
Nice.
And so I researched music specifically for that. I have a
Nice.
degree in musicology, so that helped me. And I personally think that a director needs to do his/her own research on their music for their other projects.
That's such
Because
a great point.
knowing the music, knowing how to use it, which also means knowing the history of the piece, the history of the composition, the history of its performance, and then eventually putting it in there is fundamental. And that's what I try to do also with this series.
What do you like about being an indie filmmaker?
Oh God, I love it. I mean, I do not disdain the other side of the medal. I have worked and I worked extensively as a director also on the other side of the medal. But what I like of it is greater freedom. Of course, there are always obstacles. Of course, there's always stuff you have to deal with and some sort of compromises, but different sort of compromises. So independent cinema is very dear to me. Have a very clear idea of what I want to do, who I want to be as a director. So that is the main field, the main kingdom where you can really express you as a director. Of course, it's not all sugar coated, and as I said, there's always compromises. But one thing is having to compromise because you don't have enough money and you have to find other other sources of inspirations and other ways to get what you want to tell on images. But and a completely different thing is being forced to do stuff that others decide, and then once the work is put out there, still has your name, and you have to go with it and to pray that it will not be torn apart by critics who should know better, because when big blockbusters are done, many critics should know that the director is there and of course has her responsibilities, but ultimately not as much as on an independent film. So even deliberately destroying a director and possibly mining their careers through a bad review of something like that, sometimes, I don't know. I'm not I'm not a huge fan of these things. I've seen them happening also about very established, beloved directors who clearly did something that they accepted to do, of course, but at the same time, the journalists slash reviewers, and not all of them, I love journalists and reviewers, of course, but sometimes seem to be behaving as if they didn't know how this world, this industry actually works.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, independent filmmaking sometimes allows you also to be not entirely, but in a good way, out of some of the industry dynamics.